All right, this is the last video for March 4th. I just posted up the class lecture, and I'm just going to pop over to it real quick. The class lecture, which I went over the new UI elements I was building. I went over updating the prefab so we can mess around with the materials and the emission. And then I went around, I talked about how I connected the time, the system time, to the daylight system, and how I parented the daylight to a parent that had a rotation offset, so I can easily move from 0 to 360 degrees throughout a 24-hour cycle. And then this online lecture I recorded on Sunday before class, and it basically is a half hour going into details of let's see, the manual time, which I was going over in class, but how I basically set up this slider to move between 0 and 24 hours, how to turn on and off like real-time connection to the clock. And so now this video is focused on this other clock script where you can actually click on the clock and on this AM PM button to change the time, where there is no slider attribute. So right now there's separate scripts. I turned this one off, I've turned this one on. But they both have a lot of shared functionality. Eventually I'm going to morph the two, maybe next week. But this is the current state of the scripts, and so I want to talk about this script, and next week I'll go into how I kind of put the two together. So I'm going to close this script because we went over this in class. These are the two scripts I want to talk about: click detector and the actual clock script that allows me to click on the clock. So part of the initial setup of this is that I went through I created the prefabs. I had a layer that I put all the prefabs on, a painted object, so that when I clicked on them, I can make sure that I should be deleting these. Now I got to go over this next one, this clock face layer. So if I open up the clock, notice that there's no collider on the base of the clock. There's no collider on the face of the clock. There's actually no colliders on the hour arms, the minute arms, second arms. I just turned them off because you don't want to actually click on them. The only thing that has colliders are these little hour indicators that we built, and I just renamed them. I think they were just named like hour indicator, all of them. I just named them to their actual spot. So actually 4 should be up here, and moved down 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to 12. And I went through and if their rotation was like negative this or that, I updated it. So now it's 30, 60, 90, 180, 240, and so on. Actually, this 7 belongs up here. So you see that whatever we click on, there's a certain rotation that gets you around the clock. All right. Now each of these do have a collider. Each of them are now on layer clock face, so that we can figure out if what we're clicking on is the clock or some painted object. Now the reason for that is because in our click manager script, I now have a left click. I separate out left click and left hold or left drag. So if you notice here, mouse button down or just get mouse button. So remember, for get mouse button, we're just deleting stuff. So here, if I'm holding down the left mouse button, and if we are hovering over a collider while we're doing that, and if that collider is on the layer that corresponds to the painted object layer, which is layer 12, we destroy that object. Then we do a left click check, and we're doing the same thing. We're shooting out a physics rate cast, see if it hits something. If it does hit something, we do a check. If it's on the clock face layer, or layer 11, we are going to run this section of code. So just be aware that I broke out that if statement. There's two now. One is looking for left hold, left drag, which is for delete. The one that's for left click which is going to be used for interacting with the clock. Now, what this is saying is that if we're left clicking and we do click over a collider, and that collider is part of the clock, then take that collider, get its transform, go up a level, go to its parent, and get the component clock, and on that clock script, call the update time method and pass in the rotation, the local Euler angle on the Y. So as I click through here, see that all these different hour indicators have different Y rotations of 30 degrees. So 360 divided by 12 gets us a 30-degree increments. That's what these Y rotations are going to be, and I'm going to use them to figure out what the time is, how to adjust the sun, how to adjust the clock, hour, minute, hand. I think I'm just messing with the hour hand. Yeah, in fact, I am just messing with the hour hand. So I'm going to use this information to adjust the clock hour hand, and I'm going to use it to adjust the sun position. Eventually, I'm going to connect in the emission of the paint stroke. But in the click script, this is how I'm aware that I'm clicking on a part of the clock meaning one of these 12-hour indicators, and I'm calling a script. So these hour indicators are a child of this clock game object, which has the clock script on it, which is why I can say, okay, if we're hitting a collider that is on layer 11, clock face, then I know that it's one of these parts of the clock. Just go up to its parent, go get the clock script, go call update time, and then pass in your individual local Y rotation. So whatever the rotation information of each of these hour hands, this right here, that's going to get passed up into clock, into here, into this script. And so if I just scrub down here, here is the update time method that receives in a float, and it's going to do some stuff based on that float. So this is how this script, input script, is being connected to this clock script if we are clicking on one of the hour indicators on the clock. So this script, the clock script, has a lot of the features similar to the previous clock script, this clock manual time change. For example, we're reading in the system time. On the awake, we're setting the time. We're setting the hour, minutes, and second hands. This is new. We're going into the update loop. We're checking the time. We're updating minutes and hours. And we're updating the time, the sun location. And we're also seeing if we should do a continuous or discrete movement on the second hand. All of this is the exact same. This method is new. This method is new. And this one is new. The other new thing I should be aware of, if I click on text AM PM, it'll jump me down here. If I turn this on and off, this is in our user interface. Notice that I move here underneath the canvas. It's just a button. That is a functional button. We are allowed to click on it. And if we click on it, we call clock update AM PM, this one here. So if we do click on this button, and if it's AM, we swatch it to PM and we add 12 hours. And if it's PM, we switch it to AM and we go back 12 hours. So we're dealing with a 24-hour cycle. So either 0 to 11 is AM and 12 to 23 is PM. We just jump back and forth. So I'll get through all these scripts. I just want to make you aware of all the major players. And this is the text element that just gets swapped between AM and PM when we click it. All right, so if I start from the top, all this, this is new. This is, I'm just saying that, oh, there's some public text, some UI text element. So I'm using the Unity engine.ui. And that's actually referencing this here, this text element. And then I have a private bool called is AM. So is it AM or PM? So if it's true, it's AM. If it's false, it's PM. These were in the previous one. I think some of these are new. We'll see what we get used to using, but here's a bunch of floats internally that the script changed quite a bit. So some of these I think I'm not using right now. Like, yeah, user setup, partial hour, not using hour temp. I'm using hour temp. Okay. So I could technically get rid of these two. Save it. And let's see, I'm using minutes, we're using hours. Yep. Okay, and we have this new float called hours temp. So let's see, we start by awaking. We set the discrete time, we set the continuous time. We set hours. So in the previous one, remember I was using hours as the int from time discrete. Well, I want to actually have that fractional part of hours as well as minutes. So I just updated the script that we're pulling straight from time continuous. Remember, it's a double. You have to cast it to a float, and hours and minutes are now floats. So I'm just automatically using time continuous for hours and minutes. I do want that fractional or that continuous movement through hour to hour, not that discrete pop at the end. I am updating hours, minutes, and seconds. This is all very similar. So it's just hours times degrees per hour, minutes times degrees per minute, and so on in seconds. Seconds, I don't use this variable as much, so I kind of just hard coded in that this is kind of what you're used to, the total seconds times degrees per second. So this is new. So hours, which gets fed in here. So time continuous total hours cast to a float. So it's some float between 0 and 0.0 and like 23.99. So if hours is less than 12, we're going to say is AM is true. We are in the AM, and we're going to set our text element here. This here, we're going to set this to AM. Else, meaning hours greater than 12, we're going to say is AM is false. We're in PM, and we're going to set our text to PM. It's pretty straightforward. So in our update, we're going to keep track of what our continuous time is. We're going to update minutes. And then here we have our minutes are constantly running. And then we're updating our hours as well. So a good question is, why is this commented out? I think, because when we click, so the reason I have, you could just put this back in. The reason I have hours commented out is that it's highly unlikely that the user is going to be in this app for an hour without updating the time. So in this update time here, we actually update the hours number. So if you just want to be, we can keep this updated and it should function the same. So either way, we're reading in our hours and our minutes. I was just kind of getting shorthand here that we don't need to constantly check hours, because by the time the user actually clicks on the clock, it's less than an hour. And so we'll just update whatever the hour is. Anyway, we update the minutes, we update the hours, and then we update our sun location. This was all from the previous one, but just note that now hours is a float, not an int. So we'll get a smooth, continuous motion of the sun going 360 degrees around us, as opposed to waiting for an hour and then the sun pops into a new location, waiting an hour, pops. Now we'll get that smooth transition per hour location. Then we just do a check if we're in continuous or discrete mode. That's left over. This is all left over. It's the same. So this script is only called if we click on an hour indicator. And I think this is the hardest one, so I'm going to go over here and just look at the UI element for now. So button UI, if we click on it, we're just going to run, here we are, we're going to run update AM PM. No parameters get passed in. So what does update AM PM do? Well, if we click on this button, we want to advance the clock 24 hours essentially. So if it is AM, if it's morning, we set it to false, meaning we set it to evening. Then we update the text on our little UI element to be PM. And then we advance the hours ahead 12. So we're always cycling from 0 to 23 hours. So if it's AM, if it's morning, and we're transitioning to afternoon, we just add 12. We don't even need to update the clock. The clock looks the same. We're just changing the hours here, and then because in the update loop, and this is why. So this is why I didn't I commented out hours, because it'll get updated here. So comment out hours. So if we click the UI, we update hours by 12, we come down here and we update our day cycle. This hour transform will get updated, but plus or minus 12, it'll come out to the same degree. The sun does move 180 degrees around its cycle. So it is important to comment this out. So I may have to adjust this later on, figure out a better method or procedure. But there's a reason now why we are not updating hours in our update loop. So, and if it's PM, we want to say is AM is true. We're moving into morning. We want to update our text to AM, and we want to reduce the hours down by 12 because we're already in the afternoon, or 12 to 23. Negate by 12, and we move into the same time in the morning. So that's how this button works. So if I click play, and now we can transition plus or minus 12 hours off the current time. Great. So, update time. Now this is coming from this script. So if you click on the clock aspect, go up to its parent, go grab the clock, go call update time with what, and pass in whatever your Y rotation is. So on this side of things, we're at the clock function. We clicked on the clock. Some rotation information gets passed in here. So we have a temp variable for hours to do some work here. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the total hours, casting it to a float because it's a double, and then negating or subtracting that same value but the integer version of it. So let's say we're at hour 20.43. So this is 20.43 minus 20. We'll have the fraction left over. All right, so I want to keep the fraction where basically how the hour hand transitions from the previous hour to the next hour, the current hour to the next hour. I want to keep that continuous change. So for example, it's 5:30. If I click play, the hour hand will be halfway between 5 and 6, or 0.5. So 5.5 gets us here. So I want to keep that little fraction of an hour. So I want to use that later when I find out what the new hour should be. So to find out the new hour, I do clicked hour rotation, whatever this rotation was. So for example, this one, 6 o'clock, is at 180 degrees, divided by degrees per hour, which if we come up here, it's 30. So 180 divided by 6, or I'm sorry, 180 divided by 30 means 6. So that tells us, oh, we clicked on the 6 o'clock one. So that's how I'm using the rotation information from these. Since I didn't name them, these numbers, you could do a big if check, like 12 if statements or a switch with 12 cases and check the name of this. But I decided just passing the rotation. It makes things a lot less simpler, or I'm sorry, a lot less complicated, more simpler. But anyway, so whatever we clicked on as some rotation divided by 30. So if we clicked on 6 o'clock, it would be 180 degrees divided by 30 means 6. So I got my number. I know I clicked on 6 o'clock here. And then whatever, so for example, we're at 5:30 or 5:32. Here's the fractional part of that 32, that halfway movement. So if I clicked on 6, and I know that I'm on the 30, I'm 30 minutes into whatever hour, I'll get back 6.5, 6.5. We're halfway through, and I know the hour, and I know I just clicked on 6 o'clock. Then I do a check, is it AM or PM? If the current state of things is PM, we're going to add 12. So that, remember, we're working a 24-hour cycle. So if I clicked on 6 and it's the PM, it's going to turn out to 18. So now I know the time of day in addition to the 12-hour point on the clock I clicked. Then if the integer value of hours temp is less than the integer of our current hours, the real time, then what I do is I update our current time that we're keeping track of with what I clicked on, and I did the update AM PM, meaning swap the spots. So the reason I did that is I figured that, okay, if it's like 6 o'clock and I click on 5, I don't think I want to go back in time. I think the user is trying to say I want to go forward to the next 5 o'clock. So that's why we jump ahead 12 hours. So if it's currently 5:30 and I click on 3, I'm not saying go back in time 2 hours. I'm saying jump ahead 10 hours or jump ahead to that next point. So now we're in 3 in the morning. If I jump back here, we're at 1 in the afternoon. But if I move forward, we're just moving forward by that certain amount of hours. All right, so that's how I get that functionality of going, if we're clicking on a less amount of time, we're going to go forward to that time. And then else, meaning whatever we clicked on is ahead. So if it's at 5:30 and I clicked on 7:30, all we do is swap out our temp with our number, that this hours number, which during our update loop just updates the hours here and the day cycle. So if we end up clicking on an hour that's less than our current hour, we're basically going to jump ahead into the next period of the day. Else, we're only going to jump ahead those few hours difference, and we're going to use that hours in our update loop for our hours transform in our day cycle. So this is why I had to just do a left click and not a left drag, or both, because then you start clicking on these 1 hour indicator and it'll like respond a few different times, because when you click, you can't help but also do like a very slight hold at the same time. So that's that. Now we have a left click and a left hold. And I went through what this does and this updates, and actually that's it. So I did have this get hours. I don't remember who was using it. I think I didn't end up using it. See, for example, my input manager, I had a public reference to clock, but I don't think I ever ended up using this. Nope, I didn't need to. So actually I can get rid of that. And in clock, looks like I'm not using this. That seems good. All right, so I went through the functionality of this new situation where if I click play, now I can swap 12 hours by AM PM, and I can jump ahead in time, and I can go back, or I should say go forward a lot. If you're going back, it means jump ahead, like this means jump ahead 10 hours. So if you don't like that functionality, I'm kind of thinking, because it took me a while to think about this, what does it mean to interact with a clock? Because a clock by default is just a passive labeling. What does it mean that these should be interactable? So it meant for going forward in time was pretty obvious to me. Like, okay, that means move forward a few hours here and there. But to go back, maybe it meant to go, let's just cycle through like to the next part of the day. It also helped me with this little jump here where you're jumping from AM to PM when you go forward, and you're actually jumping back when you move from PAC to AM to PM from 11 to 12. Cool. So that is the clock script, and that is how it connects with here with the input script.